Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Queerness Diaries. I'm Connor Edwards, and I'm very happy today because I am joined by my new co-host, Joseph Federico, and we're going to be talking about many different topics, but in the mental health sphere specifically. So, hello, Joe. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Hey, Connor, thanks for having me. Thank you so much. It's an honor.
Yeah, I'm super excited to have you on because I've been, saying for a while when it comes to mental health and sharing stories, it's always great to have someone that you can not only bounce ideas off, but share your stories and find, commonality, differences. And I'm so excited to have these discussions with you. I think it'd be very important for the community, but also anyone that finds this video and podcast that wants to get the stories around mental health. Maybe we'll give a bit of advice, but we're definitely going to focus on the stories, aren't we?
Absolutely. And, you're 100% correct, Connor. These are important stories. You and I have been speaking for a while. What you're doing is amazing work for the community, for social media. And even if we touch one or two people, that's a success as far as I'm concerned. And hopefully the message grows from there. So I'm
Yeah.
very excited to be here.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's just so many things when it comes to mental health. It's really an endless well of things that could be spoken about. We're going to talk today specifically around social anxiety. And so each week we'll do a different topic, but we're going to start today with our experiences with social anxiety, which is something that I think affects everyone to some degree. But
Sure.
for some of us, like me, it affects us in a lot of ways, and I always say a few years ago because I do watch The Real Housewives, but there was a random quote from Real Housewives of New York about this housewife. And I remember she just didn't fit with the group, and they said, "You're the turnip that doesn't fit in the fruit basket." And I said,
Right.
that's the quote that I feel applies to
That's
my
it.
life and social situations. No matter what group I'm in, I always find myself just on the peripheral, like wanting to just get the hell out of there, whether it's a friend's wedding or the work Christmas party, all these things
Yeah.
which should not give me stress. I think
Right.
about for days and come up with hypotheses for the worst possible scenarios. And I'm like, why am I doing that,
Right, like what's going on, right, mentally, like what's happening, what's actually happening. But I can definitely certainly speak to that, especially, this will be airing after the holiday season, but during
Yeah.
the holiday season, and I can speak to that as well, even my experiences in that, which we're all human, but we all should be speaking about this. So
Yeah, for sure. And I think it'd be good at first to kind of delve in kind of to the beginnings of our journeys with social anxiety, because for a lot of people, it's either built up over traumas through time. For others, like for me with my ADHD, as far back as I can remember, even when I was a little kid, I've always had this anxiety around social situations. But how's it been for you with sort of your journey around the social aspects of anxiety? Is it something that you've always had, or has it kind of taken on a life of its own over the years?
that's a great question. In therapy and speaking with you and thinking about it,
Mm.
I have always suffered from it. And it's just something you have to live with, like eating, breathing, sleeping, and
Yeah.
not necessarily a queer thing or an LGBT thing, but I've always had in my life from a very young age. And I think that
Yeah.
really derived, or the trauma, if you will, derived from maybe probably my upbringing. And not complaining about that by any means, but
Yeah.
I always had to be on. And that was a very big thing in my household. So I can certainly say that it derived from when I was a child.
Yeah.
And it's something I learned to live with. And I can go into many examples, of course, but definitely over 30 plus years. I don't look that bad, I know, but over 30 years of dealing with it, especially now as a business owner. I don't
Yeah.
have a choice. I have to rely on myself for
Yeah, for
presentation
sure.
and going to train people and coach and reposition myself as the professional. I don't have a
Yeah.
choice now. So
Yeah. Yeah, and I think for a lot of us, it's just something that we will always have, but we have to learn to live with and navigate, especially for you when it comes to owning your business and dealing with clients every day and always, having to speak with people. The anxiety might always be there, but you kind of get used to it over time when you're constantly in meetings and arranging things and going to different events and traveling. It's like, even if the anxiety is there, you learn to at least present, don't you, a way of feeling like, oh yeah, everything's fine. But internally, sometimes it can't be always great.
It's true. I have to speak, have a pep talk with myself most every time before I go out to a client's place of employment or get on a meeting and say, they've hired you for a reason. You're the professional. And
Yeah,
and have a little rally with myself and say, you need to get up, get dressed, and go
yeah,
and fight this,
yeah,
as in myself, in order to perform and live the life I've always dreamed of. And that's a very big part of it. That's a big motivator, is the money, but also quite literally changing people's lives
yeah,
because of the work that I do. And I'm very proud of that, but it's a struggle. It's a
yeah,
struggle for me. Absolutely, yes.
yeah, definitely. And I think for me, like looking back, I had as a kid, I was just, and now I realize that it is a part of my ADHD and being drawn to. There's an aspect with ADHD of a lot of us find ourselves in dangerous situations. And I'm not saying dangerous, but situations where we just end up in situations that we maybe shouldn't be in or are, for example, as a kid, whilst the other kids will be playing football and out on the street, I wanted to do urban exploration. I'd be
Sure.
exploring abandoned houses. That was like the draw to
Yeah,
danger, and that was what I sort of did to get that dopamine fix. So I'd be doing really dangerous stuff like the abandoned farmhouses in my town. I'd go and explore rather than socialize with the kids.
that sounds
And
so
so
much
it
fun.
made me, yeah, I really enjoyed it, but it made me very detached from, the other kids that were on the local estates. And so a lot
Sure.
of these situations where I should have been socializing from a young age, I was taking myself off, was obsessed with tornado chasing and all these ideas as a kid. So all my hobbies didn't fit. And growing up in a small town where everyone, at least it felt like everyone follows the same path, the same hobbies as a kid.
Right.
And there wasn't even that many video games around in the 90s. I mean, there was like PlayStation and that, but my
There
parents were
weren't
very
too
much the
many. Yeah,
type.
you're right.
Yeah, but my parents were very much the type like go out, socialize, but I would go off as a kid and do these dangerous things looking back, but as I've gotten older, it's meant that a lot of the social skills that maybe I should have picked up at a young age, I didn't. And
Mhm.
so when it's not a learned behavior, it becomes more of a struggle. And if you don't get those learned behaviors, I think at a young age, it's always going to be a challenge, especially when you have something like anxiety or ADHD. And so it's played into my adult life, I know, in the sense that ironically, those situations that might have been dangerous as a kid, I don't fear dangerous situations if something like that
Right.
happened. But a
Right.
social situation feels dangerous to me because it's like uncharted territory and it's something that I'm not naturally used to. It just doesn't come naturally to me. It never will, and I've learned to accept it. But yeah, because I never got those skills at a young age,
Sure.
it's always been a foreign concept to me.
And that's okay admitting it too. We have to start, as we had said, you had said, start the conversations, be real with ourselves, and
Yeah.
then try to reach other people that are in the same boat or the same situation. And I actually commend you, and I'm really, having known you for a while, I'm really proud of you for saying that, because we have to accept ourselves and love ourselves and navigate,
Um,
and you are navigating through it, even though you
yeah.
still have that in your life. So amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Thanks a lot. I think, we all learn to do the best we can with what we've got, don't we, in the end?
That's
And
all we can do.
yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. And I think it'd be good as well to kind of talk about how our social anxiety in terms of symptoms shows up for us, even in our everyday lives, but also when there might be something like a major social event. So for you, what
Yes.
are the main ways that it will show up?
I can cite two examples. One definitely coming from corporate America, the corporate
Yeah.
world. I worked my way up. I worked for Verizon for a few amount of years.
Yeah.
And that was originally, this is crazy to even admit this, Connor, but that was my dream job
Yeah.
back then. I had it always envisioned of, myself walking up to this big building and going up to whatever floor and wearing a suit and tie and having meetings in
Yeah.
boardrooms. And I did all that. And it
Yeah.
was just, I mean, it wasn't handed to me necessarily, but I walked into it and I was proud to work my way up within the company itself at the time. And I did my job and I had all these meetings, and pretty much immediately, because of the demands of the job that I navigated and quite well, to be
Yeah.
frank, I'm proud of that fact. I had to combat that anxiety of having meetings with like multimillionaires within the company itself that
Yeah.
didn't even want to give me the time of day. We
Yeah.
had a very short amount of time to get the point across and, present something, offer advice, get a plan together for social media, for instance, or PR or event
Yeah.
management. And before even those in-person meetings had occurred, I would have a prep time with my manager, during
Yeah.
those hours. And there would be anxiety brewing even before we had met with their superior
Yeah.
in preparation of, well, they expect very quick and this and that. And I'm a person that likes to take their time, cross,
Yeah.
their T's and dot their I's, not
Mhm.
rush through a presentation, for instance, because I had worked hard on whichever project.
Yeah.
So even before getting to the main event, there was anxiety brewing
Yeah,
on
I know what you mean.
of
Yeah.
knowing how the person was going to react. So preemptively, I got very nervous.
Yeah.
And I had to work through that. Sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. Sometimes I fumbled and sometimes I succeeded. And I still worked my way up within the company itself. Later on, I will say, because I do have a bout of Tourette's, not bad. I know people have it worse. That's
Yeah.
always been on my mind, even from when I was diagnosed as a child. So
Yeah.
having to overcompensate for certain things, learn not to stutter, take deeper breaths,
Yeah.
speak better, and put the pressure on myself. So that in itself was anxiety um, inducing for me my
Yeah.
entire life. So later on within the company, sometimes my symptoms come out with me maybe blinking my eyes or breathing in a different pattern than I usually do, where
Yeah.
other may or may not notice. And in this case, because I was up for a new position under a different startup company for IoT, the Internet of Things, uh,
Yeah.
under Verizon, there were a lot of people on my heels trying to get my position at the same time. So on
Yeah.
top of
Yeah.
being pressured to jump roles, evolve into a new role that I was unfamiliar with, on
Yeah.
top of people trying to come after me and knock me down because they wanted my position, started showing I started showing different symptoms of anxiety that were coming out um,
Yeah.
sets. And that was very difficult for me because I try to pride myself in being well groomed and not showing my, not having that mask being torn off, right?
Yeah.
Corporate setting. So it was very difficult for me at the time because I couldn't control these other symptoms that were coming out. Clearly, I was stressed and I was
Yeah.
anxious, and other people were noticing. So my manager at the time pulled me into her office and she's like, people are noticing what's going on. Like, are you okay? Do you need help? But
Yeah.
more like it felt like a scolding. And I said, I didn't say this at the time. I should have, but um, I speak with more conviction now than I have ever in the past. Uh,
Yeah.
growth.
Yeah.
But I should have said, I can't control this. Please back off. You're making,
Yeah.
but in a corporate setting, I couldn't have said that at the time.
Yeah.
And it is what it is, but that's how anxiety has treated me or gotten the best of me in the past. And I've
Yeah.
worked very hard to try to curb some of those symptoms, curb the way or evolve the way I present myself, or even prepare, as I had said before, a meeting or a coaching session or
Yeah.
a training session with one of my clients. I don't have a choice now.
Yeah.
So if that all makes sense, I hope it did, and hope somebody, is
Yeah.
like, yeah,
Sure.
me too, or can relate. But anxiety is a real thing, and it can come out in many different ways, Connor. So
Yeah, for sure. And I always say it's difficult when you are already aware of something, but you're trying to mask it, especially we do it a lot, in our jobs in the corporate world with the pressure of just how it can be, especially in an office environment. And then suddenly, if someone picks up on something and then to be taken into a meeting when you're already aware of it and kind of have their judgments and assumptions, it can create, when you're feeling anxious anyway, even more dread around going into the office, even more dread around presentations,
yes,
even more dread around the speech. So it then creates like this negative feedback loop that goes around in your head. And it's like,
it only adds fuel
suddenly
to the fire. Yeah,
yeah, it's like
yeah,
this, you then get these traumatic experiences almost just from going to work because it's like, oh, what's going to happen today? Like, are they going to notice? Like, oh, and I have to really smash this presentation because if I don't, then they're going to relate it to my mental health and they're going to call me in again. And it just creates even
right.
more
Who's
anxiety.
watching? Who's listening? Is
Yeah.
somebody judging me? So then you start creating, as you had said, your own inner monologue
Yeah.
that may not be correct, or a reality. And then you make yourself even more anxious, thinking, that you're walking into the lion's den per se.
Yeah.
And it makes things, or it can make things so much worse. I will tell you this: the company wound up getting wiped out anyway.
Yeah.
So I held on to my position as long as I could.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then fate was just like, you're all going to be let go anyway. So it didn't matter, in hindsight. And then I
Yeah.
just, and then I just worked my way up. I mean, therapy, I'm a big proponent of mental health and working with a therapist. I
Yeah.
know it's not for everybody. It should be for everybody, in my opinion. I'm going to be
Yeah.
truthful and tell you this right now. Audience, you, even looking at myself in the camera, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Work on your mental health and learn to produce the tools to get through these things stronger than ever. But having even worked in startup culture, that's a whole different,
Yeah.
world, a whole different ball game, a whole different animal. And having grown my own business, as I had said, there's anxiety that's still lingering every single day when I wake up,
Yeah.
even trying to push myself and say, I have to do this. You have to rely on yourself, Joseph, and you really don't have a choice. So how do you navigate that going forward?
Yeah, for sure. And I think with awareness as well, it's like we can have awareness and just keep putting it off. But when we have the awareness and we actively recognize, like, okay, I'm having an anxious moment, like, I'm really stressed right now. And sometimes it's good just to not even verbalize it, but just say it internally, like, okay, I am having a stressful moment right now,
Right.
rather than just trying to do everything to stop it. Because sometimes when you do that, you can just try so much that it does not work. And unfortunately, a lot of people get to this point where they have the panic attack or the nervous breakdown, or they mess up the speech, or they walk out of the interview. I mean, I've done it countless times, like where my
Yes.
anxiety has reached so
It's
ridiculously
breaking
high
point.
level to the point
Yeah.
where I've, for example, not gone to the event that's maybe in 5 minutes, like because it's just cripplingly high, and I'm like, oh, for goodness sake, and then I'll get home and beat myself up about it. But I've
Yes.
spent so long in my head coming up with these hypotheses about the worst possible scenario, dreading the
Yes.
presentation, dreading the speech, that it will be perfectly prepared, whatever it is, and
Right.
due to my own imposter syndrome from this negative feedback loop, I'll just throw it
Yes.
all out the window a few minutes before. It's something I've learned to work on, but in my 20s, it was something I did all the time when it got too much, that overwhelm from anxiety, rather than deal with it and face a possible. Because my thought process was always, I'm gonna mess it up, embarrass myself, make an idiot of myself. But
Right.
looking back, I missed so many opportunities because I just walked away in the final hour and would let a lot of people down. Nowadays,
Sure.
I just say to someone, look, I'm stressed and the presentation might be horrendous. Like in July, I had to do a speech in front of 100 people in Barcelona, and it was actually around this podcast, but my story with mental health, and I dreaded it so much. Every day I was coming up with all these things that would never happen. Like I'm going to fall off the stage. The PowerPoint isn't going to work.
Right.
I'm going to drop the microphone. All these different things.
Right.
And so by the time it got to the day, somehow I did the speech, but it was the first in a long time that I had done. I remember on that day, I couldn't eat. I was just in this, I was sweating, I was
You were so,
blinking. I couldn't even speak to my mom on the phone. I'm like, just speak to me after, in work that day. I could not focus. All I could think about is that speech, getting it out of the way, and how it was going to go horrendously. And that's the thing with anxiety. It's the fear around social shaming that we get in our heads that something's
yes.
going to happen to embarrass ourselves. And the reality is, people don't care that much.
No, we're our own worst
Yeah,
enemy.
so
But I also, in you sharing your story, and thank you, for being so, truthful and organic with that, because it makes me think. And that's why I think I know why we're doing this, to make other people think about their
yeah,
own
yeah,
situations and in their own, mental health and their own anxiety.
yeah,
I also think it's important, and we should be more open about this in whichever country we're sharing from or tuning in from.
yeah,
It's also the responsibility of the other party. As you were saying, you couldn't even speak with your mom and you told her to call you afterwards. The
yeah,
other people in our lives, we need to be more open about setting those boundaries and saying, I'm nervous, please contact me later, or give me 5 minutes to take
yeah,
care
for sure.
of anxiety. I'm whatever you're going through. And the other person should be open. Will make things a lot easier, so if they can understand what people like us are going through, that draw the boundaries, put the hand up and say, I love you and thank you very much for supporting me. Please get back to me at a later date or after I
Yeah,
do the presentation, or just back off. Because I
yeah,
think a lot of people just want to jump in and help. And that actually, at least for me, I can speak for myself, and it sounds like you as well, actually makes things worse when people start asking questions. Can I help? Can I do this?
yeah, definitely.
My head's about to explode.
Yeah,
Please take the warning and back off for like even 2 seconds so I can catch my breath, tell myself it's okay, come down from the high of being anxious, and then proceed accordingly.
yeah, definitely. I think when there's so much going on in our heads that we sometimes don't need another voice, like trying to decipher everything that's going on and give
Yes.
us
Yes.
advice or something in that moment. Sometimes we just need a breather, and it's learning as well. I think why it's difficult for a lot of us to just say, "Oh, look, I need a breather. I'm having a moment with my anxiety," is mental health was not, I don't know about for you with but for me, growing up with my family, it was not something that we would discuss. It was not something that, for example, people didn't talk about anxiety. They didn't talk about ADHD. It was just not spoken about.
No,
And
same here.
now I feel like a lot of progress is being made. But for many generations, a lot of people have grown up in these environments where the conversation was shut down and there was a lot of stigmas around anxiety and around ADHD or whatever it is, and social
So
anxiety
true.
as well. And I think, yeah, growing up, it was not something that was really openly discussed
No, it wasn't.
with my mom or my dad. It is now. Me and my mom talk about our anxiety pretty much every day because there's always something. But
Right.
in the past, it was like, and I'd noticed, like with my grandma or anyone else in the family, it would instantly get shut down. Any conversation, they'd be like, "Oh, just do this," or "Oh, you'll be fine." But when people say that, it's kind of dismissing your feelings, and I think
Yes.
it's because people don't always know how to deal with it. But yeah, I think for a
They
lot
feel
of us, it's
uncomfortable
learning
speaking about
to,
it.
yeah,
Yeah.
learning to have those conversations now in the present. But for growing up and for many of our generations, it was not something that was natural in conversations. So it's learning to be the ones to do it now.
And taking responsibility for it. You're 100% correct. Even in my own life, my upbringing, again, I was raised well, I think, and I have, of course, we all have our own trials and tribulations to overcome and our trauma to work through. It's our responsibility, very important, at least in my opinion.
Yeah.
But the 80s and 90s, it wasn't spoken about. And if I was the anxious child, I would be again dismissed and be told, well, just calm down or go to your room or take a deep breath. You'll be fine. Push through it.
Yeah.
And then your nervous system gets so out of whack. And you then produce these masks or learn how to just, survive or get through whatever situation that may be or may have been in when you were a kid. We didn't have any tools. At least I
Yeah.
didn't. We didn't talk about mental health or anxiety or boundaries when I was a child.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that could be detrimental. And it wasn't done, I don't think, on purpose, but it just wasn't a thing to be spoken about at the time.
Yeah. And I think as well, there's been a lot of, for so many of us growing up around almost like toxic masculinity of you're not allowed to be emotional, you're not allowed to be
That's a whole
anxious.
different
Yeah.
podcast, my friend.
Yeah. And it's like when you grow up around that environment, it's almost expected of you to not show your emotions and have a moment.
No,
And so as much as times may be changing now, we've had those learned behaviors. And so for me, a lot of it over the last 10, 15 years has been learning to be more open about my emotions. And that includes
yes,
the social anxiety or any anxiety attacks that I have because so many years I just minimize it and I just be like, oh, I'm fine, I'm fine. Now I've reached a place of being able to be a lot more open, but it's been definitely a process that year by year has gotten more normal for me, and it should be normal for everyone. But when you've not
it
grown
should.
up with it being something that you discuss and you just have to shut down, it takes a while sometimes because,
It
yeah, I
does.
did grow up in that environment where my dad and all the men I knew in my life, it was like,
Me too.
just shut it off, you know?
Just turn it off, excuse me, and told I mean, to a point when I was a kid, I was a very emotional, I'm still a very emotional person and learning how to, but it takes time to chisel away at that and learn how to
Yeah,
navigate to become a better man, a better human being, a better person in today's modern society. But growing up, my father would literally tell me, boys don't cry. Like,
yeah,
that song by The Cure. And at the time, you have to believe your father, and
yeah,
not to, this is going to be a whole different podcast, as we had said, but, don't show your emotion. Don't show them the next move, be a man. So I
yeah,
know exactly what you probably had gone through as well. Every man in my life, except my grandfather. My grandfather was a World War II veteran, and he was the kindest, most gentle man I had ever met. Never
yeah,
told me how to act or what to say, or I could or couldn't cry. He just let me be me. And
yeah.
I'm forever grateful for that. So he was a rare gem in my life, at least growing up back then. So
Yeah, I think it is so important when we've had a male figure in our life that has shown that emotion and some warmth when often, growing up in them environments where, because I don't know about you, for me, a lot of for some reason, I associated um, my anxiety and a lot of these things with me as something that I had to try and control more around the relationship with my family because it seemed more feminine for me, and I'd already been had issues after I tried to come out, and so I felt this need to present a very
right.
masculine image, and then that led it to more anxiety as time went on. So I'd find
Absolutely.
myself in social situations then as well, trying to hide my emotions. It's all a lot. It's all to do with masking at the end of the day. Get so
Yeah, it
used to
really
masking
does.
different parts of of yourself. But I think a lot of my social anxiety as well has come from that era of my life from like 17 to 25 when I moved to Madrid of having to hide my sexuality, but in that I also, as a result, would hide my anxiety and emotions, and a lot of anxiety was being outed again, and then
Yes.
that would present itself in the workplace even too, because I remember there was a gay guy that I worked with, and I had so much social anxiety around being outed in the workplace, and so it was all about like if I show my anxiety, if I show my emotions, then they're gonna associate it with me being gay because they'd associate it
Yes.
with it being a feminine thing. And I'd felt big rejection at that age. And so it played in, I think, looking back to the social anxiety that I even have in the present, because I associated at that time anxiety as being something that was a feminine thing that I had to conceal
Yes.
and had to hide and I couldn't show. But obviously I felt it. And so when you're trying to mask it for so long, eventually it's just going to boil over.
But it was valid, Connor. That was absolutely valid, you
Yeah.
know. And you are hitting a lot of points in my past too. I'm speaking your truth,
Yeah.
I've uh the video film rolling in my head of, what happened versus what was real versus what
Yeah.
was just I had to mask or to get through or to survive or evolve. Even being out and proud in my family, in my 20s, and I've been with my partner going on 19 years, which is like 15 gay years, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Practically married, not legally, but for, for different reasons. But even the anxiety had hit me at holidays or when I was around my family and my partner, my boyfriend. Um, we, all those years, I couldn't be myself, but that was
Yeah.
me internalizing, right, that anxiety,
Yeah.
thinking I'm not comfortable even kissing my partner in front of whoever, at a Christmas party or a dinner or whatever. And that
Yeah.
was me judging myself, but being anxious that I felt like it was too feminine to be with
Yeah.
another man in front of my family. So I can definitely relate to that as well, where I just was never really myself, even with my gay friends. The past few years, I always felt like I had to be the breadwinner, and I always had to make plans. I always had to make things beautiful and this and putting the pressure on myself, but being
Yeah.
anxious. I never, to be honest, never really showed my true colors with my gay friends at the time.
Yeah.
Say I was better than anybody else or what have you, but it was me putting pressure on myself, being
Yeah.
anxious. Well, what if the food's not right? What if the event is not okay? What if I say something or do something incorrect? Right?
Yeah.
Are they going to judge me as other gay men? So it's in every facet of our lives, unfortunately. You just have to navigate it, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I think a lot of us with that experience around being able to open up with, our queerness or gender identity, whatever it is for someone is there's a lot of social anxiety that comes with that. So, for example, with me, if I look back, I don't know, at 21 in a work environment, it's like I have to present myself in a social setting, which was, for example, the workplace that I went straight into after college. It was very homophobic environment. And so that
Wow.
gay guy that I knew got a lot of behind his back, mostly like nicknames and stuff. And because I was presenting myself as straight, I felt the pressure in those social situations to, in my head, I was like, oh, are they gonna, think I'm gay? I have to do this, I
Sure.
have to do that, I have to present as this way, or I'm gonna get all this name calling, all these things. So a lot of it, again, was around being outed. And then also with my family at home, presenting myself as someone that didn't show my anxiety because of the possible rejection from them. So I think
Sure.
eventually it built, and then suddenly I find myself in Madrid, 25, on my own, living free, and all this social anxiety that built up from my childhood, built up around coming out. Because when I went to I think and I said this to you before on our podcast. I was not fully out again till I was about 26, so about a year after I moved to
Right.
Madrid. So that first year when I moved to Madrid, I still hadn't come out again to my family. And I just left that job where I'd been masking for like several years. And I
Oof.
found myself suddenly I have to navigate living on my own, a social life, dating, going into teaching 30 students in a class. And I've never had the social tools. I had so much. I think I remember when my mom actually visited with my sister about 2 months after I moved there, and she was like, "You've lost so much weight," because I'd just been so stressed. And one physical way that my anxiety will show up for me is I just lose my appetite. I don't want to eat.
Sure.
And I
It's so
remember
bad that
those
you
initial
can't. Yeah.
months when I moved to Madrid, I was just it was such a struggle. It was something that got easier in time, but those initial 2, 3 months, suddenly living on my own, and this buildup of 25 years of anxiety that I hadn't dealt with, it was like, what the hell am I doing?
Your body was forcing you to, or your, yeah,
Yeah,
you were forced probably to accept it or to change it.
yeah. And I
Yeah.
think I don't know if you've ever had like that moment where you just feel like you've been pushing the anxiety away for so long, and then that was the first time like I always remember when I started teaching in Madrid, having my first like full-blown panic attack like 2 months after moving there.
Right.
Outside of a classroom, I was just stood there with so much dread over the thought of going in and standing in front of, because kids can be not the nicest anyway, but these were
I've heard.
teenagers
Yeah.
like 17, 18-year olds,
No.
so they weren't that much younger than me at the time. I
Right.
had so much dread about going back into the classroom that I was literally hyperventilating outside the door and just had so much dread. And I always remember that moment so specifically. It was like the first major moment, I think, where not dealing with my anxiety for all those years had just erupted. And I was faced with, after that, having to think, okay, I have to do something about this because
Sure.
I've just moved to Spain. It's not like I could just, I'd signed an apartment contract and they're all,
Can't just go home and forget about it. Yeah.
yeah. So it was like very confronting after that moment to suddenly be like, okay, I have to figure out a way to navigate my anxiety, especially social anxiety.
Right.
And yeah, I don't know for you if you've had any moments like that, but I always remember that moment for me very specifically.
Not necessarily in that way, Connor, but things do have a way of, at least, again, speak for myself in my life, coming out. If I suppress it for too long, I explode in different ways or erupt in a
Yeah,
way that I'm, not meaning to, at a partner or a friend or a family member. That is definitely one thing that has happened to me. But it just has had presented itself in different ways.
yeah,
Not in a panic attack necessarily. I'm pretty good now again, and being in therapy for 3 years and learning different tools, how to navigate different things, how to suppress or how to curb that, how to take a step back, draw boundaries within my own life, and say, I'm on the verge of a panic attack or being overly nervous or anxious, and speak to myself. That's one of the
yeah,
tools I've learned to accept and integrate within my own life. But I
yeah,
want to turn the tables, actually, just for a moment, and say, or ask, been what have what were any positive outcomes that you had seen in your life because of your anxiety? And I can share one example, of that's something that happened to me within this holiday season only a few weeks ago. I was so anxious to be around these new people, and we had gone to the second annual Christmas party for one of my partner's
yeah.
ex coworkers. You think, great, you've seen these people before, but putting pressure on myself to buy a new outfit, thinking of
Oh,
things
yeah,
I'm going to say preemptively to start conversations. What drinks am I going to order? Am I going to eat in between all these what
yeah,
ifs, right?
yeah. The internal monologue.
That's anxiety inducing as well. At least it was for me, or is for me.
Yeah.
wind up getting there, taking Christmas pictures, having great conversations. And there was this gentleman I hadn't seen for years, one of their other, ex coworkers that I had seen sporadically at different events throughout the years.
Yeah.
And we had never sent anything to each other, really, hardly ever, besides Merry Christmas or Happy
Yeah.
Holidays, have a great weekend, whatever, very um, brief conversations. I was nervous when this gentleman, this time about 2 weeks ago, came up to me and I
Yeah.
just grabbed a plate of food. I was so nervous as it was. I was so hungry. And
Yeah.
this guy came up to me and started having this conversation. My anxiety went from about 4 to 24. It
Yeah.
jumped about,
Yeah.
so many points. And I had all these things going on in my mind as well. When can I have a bite of food? Is it rude to eat while we're having a conversation? And thinking all these what ifs as well. But it turned out being a really great conversation. My anxiety almost immediately dropped to
Yeah.
having a conversation with this other gentleman about being a small business owner as well and going it alone.
Yeah.
And finding that common ground, having that common conversation was definitely a positive outcome, to the point where we spoke for a good 20 or 30 minutes about being small business owners and
Yeah.
how that changed our lives and offering each other advice, to the point where after we were leaving, we shook hands. I shook hands with this gentleman.
Yeah.
Nice guy. His name is also Joe. Great name, by the way.
Yeah.
And he had thanked me for the conversation, for offering him advice.
Yeah.
And I left on a positive note rather than leaving on a, I could have done better, or what if this had happened? What if that had happened? So I wanted to kind of flip the script on this conversation and ask you, has something like that, something positive derived out of your anxiety where you have been proud of, or something of that nature?
Yeah, I think that's great, isn't it, with your story as well, when you suddenly, when you have the opportunity to, once you have that conversation sometimes with someone, it's amazing what can happen, isn't it? Because sometimes anxiety, and I've been in that place where when it could be like the work Christmas party or whatever it is, of so used to coming up with these different hypotheses and planning every aspect that it's just difficult to be present. And then when you're present, it's amazing what can happen, isn't it?
It is.
And I think for me, like a lot of things I feel like I've confronted with my anxiety this year. And ironically, it's not been in person, a lot of it. It's been with, for example, doing the podcast and putting it out onto YouTube and social media and
Sure.
putting videos out on LinkedIn and a lot of the social media world in general. Like I was someone that I think a lot of people can relate. I've grown up as someone that hates to be on camera. I will cringe when I listen to myself back. And it was very difficult for me. When I started the podcast, for example, I almost deleted it about 10 times the first episode because I was like, oh, what are people going to think? Are they going to judge
Yeah.
my voice, my little tics that I have from ADHD, whatever it is? And amazingly, like, has been so much support around doing that and confronting it, and also in doing the podcast interviews every week and getting to, meet people like yourself that a year ago, for example, I was someone that'd be like, oh, I just would put it off because the anxiety was too much. And I had that imposter syndrome so much in my head, like, oh, no one's going to listen to my podcast. Or,
Right.
or I cherry pick parts about myself, my appearance, which is a whole nother conversation, but the anxiety around um, being present has always been a difficult thing for me. I've always been someone that gets so in my head about the what ifs that I don't be in the present so many times. And it's been very rewarding this year to just put episodes out, to just meet people, to just, if someone wants to come on a podcast or just talk from LinkedIn or have a conversation, I always say yes. Whilst I think prior to this year, I'd always find an excuse and avoid doing it. So I think that's
Sure.
been one of the main things I've got it's been a big accomplishment, I think, for this year in confronting my anxiety as well, because yeah, I still might have it show up a lot, but it's gotten so much better than say a year ago when I'd
Right.
be in that place. And so yeah, it's been very rewarding, I think, with the podcast, getting to have those
That's great.
conversations every week.
And growing and evolving as a human being and a
Yeah,
member of the queer community as well. That there's power in that. That there's
yeah,
absolutely power in that. That's amazing. Yeah.
yeah, definitely. And I think that's one of the great things about the queer community. So many of us have, whether it's trauma bonding, whatever it is, so many of us have had
Yes.
shared
Oh yes.
experiences that it makes it very relatable. And also for me, it's a lot more comfortable to show up and say, "Oh, I have an issue right now with my anxiety," than, you know, and again, this will be something for a future episode around a straight man where I would grow up and present
Yes.
myself as someone that would minimize it. It's much more easy for me to open up around members of the queer community because often I find common ground and that a lot of the anxiety stems from a similar place with them as well. So I feel a lot more able to be in a safe space and open, if you know what I mean.
And then that's where the conversation flows easier as well. Like once you hit that common ground and
Yeah.
then you can share those shared experiences, then essentially a cakewalk thereafter, which is
Yeah, for
also
sure.
amazing because there's power in that too. Because as I think queer men, we have been trained in our society to minimize ourselves, make ourselves smaller and more digestible. I say to hell with that now as I'm learning more about myself and my community and trying to build that back up,
Yeah,
not
definitely.
only with, someone like you and that's international, but as I had said, trying to take people that are in my life as part of the queer community, gay authors and creatives, and connect each other and assure that we're all in a safe space.
Yeah,
Because if we don't
definitely.
take that into our own hands, who's going to? We have
Yeah,
to do that
definitely.
ourselves. But I did want to bring up one more thing that I think we're going to hold for another episode, maybe the next episode or two, is
Yeah.
about burnout and how important that is to overcome.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I think having the conversations around burnout is so important because for me, for example, I've had burnout from putting it together for this anxiety and then finally having those panic attacks and having those moments, work situations, so many things. When you put something off for so long, you're going to end up with the gasoline on empty. And whether you've reached that,
On everyone.
yeah, and whether you reach that point of just being, whether it's a panic attack, whether it's a breakdown, whatever it is, eventually it catches up. And so it's really important to address it. And in the next episode, we're going to go into our stories with our journey with
Oh,
burnout, how it's
so
shown
important.
up for us, our journeys with it, and kind of not give advice, but be very authentic with our stories, aren't we? And I think that will be very important for a lot of people out there.
And people are already talking about it on the social media platforms, on your LinkedIn, on my LinkedIn,
Yeah.
looking to possibly even have like an LGBT small business support group in the new year, to talk about these things on the podcast and off the podcast and beyond
Yeah.
is such an important conversation and topic. I'm really really looking forward to it, and these are actually very cathartic sessions
Yeah,
with you as
definitely.
well.
Yeah, definitely. I think there is a
They're
power in
helpful.
just being able to speak out our stories. And also for anyone who's listening, if you have, yeah, anything you want to say about your own story or any, well, I'm always open to advice as well. But
Yeah.
anyone that wants to open up about their own stories, drop a comment with your experience around not just social anxiety, but all things related to anxiety and kind of where you've been on your journey. Because I'm always fascinated to hear about other people's experiences as well.
Share it with us. Absolutely.
Yeah,
I love to get in those conversations as well.
yeah, definitely. So,
Especially over
well,
LinkedIn.
yeah, definitely. And So for everyone listening, so thank you so much for tuning in. I think these conversations are so important for us to have. There is that power in just being able to be authentic and say, yeah, sometimes I get bloody anxious and it's crap. And
I'm human, and that's okay.
yeah, yeah, for sure. And thank you so much today, Joe, for joining me and for being so open as well with your story. It's
Pleasure.
been
Thank you for having me, your
fantastic
co-host.
yeah, it's been fantastic to have you and hear about your experiences as well.
You as well. I can't wait to do it again.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. And to everyone who's tuned in, thank you for coming to the Queen's Diaries and drop us a comment with your own story because I would love to hear it. So thank you so much.